Hey, I'm Tristan Thorvaldson. I'm a volunteer at the CMA for the summer camps. I love art and I love the art field, and I just wanted to really get into it and see is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Maybe I would like to teach children or something like that. And overall, it has been a great experience to show me that I would enjoy being in a classroom setting. I think my favorite part about it is seeing everything that they make. It's just really rewarding to follow them through the week or however long they're here and see what they make and get to know their personalities throughout the week. I was in a metalworking class with the teenagers, and we had a really hard time getting into cutting the metal and blah, blah, blah. But these younger kids, when they cut the metal, they just go for it. I think it's that they don't have any fear about it and they just want to be creative. And so they just go for it, and they do better than we did because we're holding back a little bit. I don't want to mess up. I would say my favorite group so far is actually the one I have right now. It's 10 to 12 year olds, and they are just fantastic. They're on top of everything. They're getting it done. We did a printmaking camp a few weeks ago, and it was just super fun. And I get to participate in most of the camp, so it's I get to take stuff home. And then the one I'm doing right now, which is jewelry making, it's just super fun to help the kids and be able to make my own stuff and do it because I don't normally get to do this stuff. And so it's not so much that it's taking away from my summer, it's really adding to it where I get to meet all these people and have such social interactions with them. I would definitely encourage people that want to know about it, want to do it, or having a little bit of drawback towards it, definitely do it.
You're listening to Binder. I'm Ray McManus. All right. Well, we are back again with Joel Ryan Cook. Joel, we were on the very first episode we did, I think, talking about Grandpa's boat. Yes. And the whole idea about what we were going to do with this podcast and storytelling in the museum and why that's so important. And not that I haven't seen you since then. Obviously, I have. But you are so super busy with a million things going on that it would be, I think, bad form on my part to not pause. And thank you for taking some time to come back on. And we're going to talk about some volunteers.
I think that's the starting point of so many things that happen in the arts.
Right.
Are people who have passion for the arts, for storytelling, for culture, for community. I think volunteerism in some ways is an origin story for a lot of people.
Well, it's certainly an origin story for you, right? Yeah. Because you started here at the museum as a volunteer.
That's right. So Dr. Randy Mack, who is the Renaissance art history professor at USC when I was there in graduate school, looked at me and he said, I think you should go be a docent at the museum. And I was like, well, yes, sir, I will do that. Right. And I went home and I literally pulled out a dictionary and was like, what's a docent? And I was like, oh, a tour guide. I can do that. I can be a tour guide. And then I called the museum and said, I would love to volunteer to do this. How do I do this? And I learned about the whole training program. And, I was at that point, that was 1993. Wow. I was 25, 26 years old and in graduate school. And it changed what I thought I wanted to do with my life. Because for me, I always want to learn. I always want the opportunity to explore my curiosity. I love that space where art and history comes together.
Right.
But I realized almost pretty quickly that this sharing, that learning, was what was really motivating me. I don't mind a good deep dive into a library and research, but I'm also got that very extroverted side that wants to share. When you are with people and talking about the arts and touring through this museum or experiencing things, but having the conversations, that's what always motivated me.
I would imagine so much of that experience was a learning process, right? You don't just take the training and then automatically just go right in and I'm an amazing docent. You had to learn a lot through that process and interacting with people and, for lack of a better word, just completely giving up your time, giving into another organization and being able to come in and sort of help people to understand what they're seeing and enjoy and appreciate what they're seeing?
I think with this many years of hindsight now, like literally 30, 30 years of hindsight, suddenly it just dawned on me it's 2023. When I look back at that period of being trained, you spend a lot of time thinking about the individual works of art in the museum and how you're supposed to know every single thing about them. That's what your head tells you. But the truth is, when your job is to pique interest, it's different than memorizing the dates and the names and the exact biography and the exact space in art historical context. You have to take that and turn it into a way to pique interest. So you have to learn to read your room. You have to learn to understand what it is they're interested in, instead of, did I get all my points that I studied out?
Right.
And that's, I think, what my biggest learning has been. And I think that's even the trajectory of art museums in my career, from volunteer to full-time staff to now as deputy director, is that movement to creating that space of engagement.
Right. I remember way back when I was directing the creative writing program for the Tri-District Arts Consortium, we would bring middle school kids up. And I think maybe one of the first couple of times I was asked, do you need somebody to kind of guide them? I'm like, no, I know my way around the museum and what I want them to do and that sort of thing. But one year I remember thinking, what the hell? Why not? I mean, if there's somebody that can do that, sure, that'd be great. Give them some insight. And one of the things that I absolutely loved and I don't remember the docent or whoever it was that was kind of walking around with us at the time, but instead of describing the way you were just describing, they just come in and they're like, okay, this was painted in, 16 whatever, and this guy was supported by a benefactor, blah, blah, blah. History that's well and good, but to a middle school kid, that's just right over their head. Instead, they ask questions. And I love that about that experience, like asking the questions like, what does this expression remind you of? And do you notice that they're not looking over here, but they're looking over there? What do you think they're looking at? They seem to be rather silly kind of questions on the surface. But what was transpiring then was all these kids were volunteering answers of what they thought might have been the right answer, and only to hear there's no wrong answer. That always stuck with me.
And that's where I think if you're a volunteer tour guide, you're coming to a place like the Columbia Museum of Art because you want to learn about art. And you can learn quite a bit through books and through classes and things like that. But what you learn from the audience member is great because you can work with an individual piece over and over and over again. But all of that individual response to that piece that comes from that inquiry-based method really gives you new insight.
How many, not to put you on the spot, but just average, how many docents do we have here that volunteer?
I think, active docents, it's probably around a roster of probably around 40 to 50.
Wow.
In there, it's got to be a pretty active core because when we're serving a lot of school audiences all week long, and then you've got group tours for adults, and you've got special programs like the TriDac program all through the summer camps. You've doubled the size of the staff through that volunteerism, through people who are passionate about learning and wanting to give so much to this organization. We are lucky to have that because the capacity, it's just really important. And all of those different points of view that are living and breathing inside of our whole CMA family of paid staff, volunteers. It's amazing. And then you also even have volunteer boards, like with our affinity groups. So you've got Friends of African American Art, you've got the Columbia Design League, you've got the Young Professional Group, the Contemporaries. Each one of them have a board of somewhere between 20 and 30 people. So think about that volunteer group too. And the kinds of programs they put on and the kinds of special guests that they have, the events that they have, and how they're inviting people in. That's where the lift of engagement happens in an organization like this. You can't thank the volunteers enough, whether they're in the galleries in our studios, in an event or serving on those volunteer boards for making this museum the museum that it is.
Right, right. If someone wanted to volunteer their time to the Columbia Museum of Art, whether it's to be a docent or whatever the case may be, how does one go about doing that?
Well, if you're interested in learning more about volunteering at the museum, there's a number of ways you could do it. If you were lucky enough to go on one of these amazing tours, talk to one of your tour guides and ask them how they did it. See what it is like to be a volunteer here. That's one way you could do it in a really personal way. You, of course, could ask our front desk about it, but we do have a part on our website that there's a section called Belong. And if you want to belong to this family, one way you can do it is volunteer, and you can just click right into that, and it'll give you some of your basic information. But we have all kinds of different ways you can volunteer. So even if it's not something that's regular with a lot of training like your docent program, something like our big arts and drafts program, which is, what I kind of call our party with the community. There's so many community engagement opportunities inside of that. But a lot of people love to volunteer and help us out with that because, you've got 800 people coming in a single night. We could use a little bit of capacity there. And it's just a great way to get to know the museum team, to get to be engaged, and for us to get to know people who really love this museum and want to be part of their community. So, yeah, I think follow us on social and then check out the Belong volunteer page on the website is one of the great ways to do it.
I mean, I can say from a personal standpoint, any time that I've ever volunteered to do anything at the museum has been probably some of the most enriching moments of my life. It is a wonderful place and a great family to be a part of. I've spent the better part of about 2 years, hosting this podcast of trying to put my finger on the one thing that makes this museum so damn special. But maybe it's the fact that there's just so many great volunteers.
Hi, I'm Emily Creedle. I am a docent here at the Columbia Museum of Art, and professionally, I am a classical musician, particularly playing the flute.
What exactly is a docent?
I didn't know. No. Yeah, I think it's a funny word, and actually I get that all the time. People are like, what does that mean? And, I usually say tour guide, but we just learned together. We were looking this up. Where did that word come from? And so it comes from Latin and then to German, meaning to teach. So I think in this context of what we've been talking about, it makes a lot of sense, right? You're someone who's teaching others, that mediator.
And that may be a draw then. If you have a general interest in wanting to teach and you happen to like art, then perhaps
absolutely.
Volunteering to be a docent might be something worthwhile.
Yeah. And it's not like you're giving lectures. Glenna really encourages us to ask a lot of questions, and you really get to learn how to ask those questions. So you have a lot of guidance, and then I think it actually flows a lot more than you might expect. I do remember my first tour, and you're like, how did that go? I have no idea. Wow. did I talk too much? Did I talk too little? Whatever. But it gets so much easier, and it's not as intense or as much pressure as you would think, and especially if you really do enjoy what you're getting to show. Everybody, all of the docents really do. I think we get so excited about various pieces. So it does really flow well.
What made you want to be a docent? And then what did you have to do to be a docent?
Sure. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland. That's where I'm from originally. And I remember going on tours at the Walters Art Gallery. And that was just a meaningful experience to me. So the other part of that was actually a studio element. So I remember just loving the fact of being really inspired and then getting this chance to go and respond by making something. And I don't even have anything specific that I remember making that was really cool. I think just that experience. And so I just had seen the advertisement for new docents, and I'm in the arts, so it's already something that I'm kind of interested in. And so it seemed like a really neat way to continue learning and growing and explore maybe giving other people that same experience.
Did you go through Glenna's boot camp?
Yes.
What is that?
She's
like?
wonderful.
She is. Oh, I absolutely love Glenna.
It was not overwhelming. Well, I guess maybe overwhelming where you're how much knowledge, but I am a classical musician. So I've had a lot of education in music history and things like that. So it was just so neat to expand all of that knowledge and see kind of what was going on in a parallel universe, right? What was going on in other art fields. So yeah, just it was really solidified a lot of knowledge. And then especially when you have to then teach it, when you're explaining it, you really find it really comes home for you.
Yeah, yeah. So during those tours, when you're teaching those, any particular moments kind of stand out that have been interesting or fun?
Well, I guess because I'm a teacher already, I really love just sharing any experience, but also often new experiences. So I think when we have a tour come in, one of the first things we ask is who's been here before and who's never been to an art museum or to the CMA before. I think I've been surprised, especially since I do the school tours, maybe third or fourth graders who've never been into a museum. So I think that is something that has been just really neat to do. And, they don't even know how to behave, but seeing them also like walk into a gallery and all of a sudden they're like everywhere. And you're like, we're going to talk about this piece, So
Right.
just like corralling them and taking that joy and that energy and that confusion even of like, what am I even supposed to do with myself in this space, and kind of guiding them and seeing them focus into attention and answer your questions or engage with whatever you're showing them. That's been really neat to see.
Do you have a favorite part in the museum in your tour?
One, I guess, genre that I really like to talk about is portrait. We actually have a good amount of different kinds of portraits.
Yes.
And that also incorporates like sculpture too. So not just painting. And one example is in Gallery 5, we have photography by Richard Samuel Roberts. He's a Columbia artist and was taking pictures, down on Sumter Street of mostly African Americans, kind of everyday people. And so just kind of seeing a picture of, you're going to only have one photograph, black and white, how they dress, trying to look dignified in their facial expression. Young students these days, were so used to having phones or cameras and taking pictures. And so, when you can delete the photo, what is that like if you were going to have one picture that captured kind of who you were? And it's usually an interesting back and forth with them.
You never know what's going to come out or where the direction is going to take you. That is such a fun age group to work with. You mentioned that you're a musician.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, is it a flautist? Is that, did I do that right?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll take it. You can do either one, flautist, flutist.
So you play flute, you
Yeah.
teach as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, tell us a little bit about your day job.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of gigs, I guess.
Yeah, right.
Different types of gigs. So I currently play around town. I've played with the Aiken Civic Orchestra. I have been teaching for 6 years at the University of South Carolina Aiken campus.
Mm-hmm.
I've done some adjunct work in Columbia. I also teach for our community music program here at USC called Carolina Music Studios, and I run a Kinderflute program, which is just a method. Maybe you've heard of like Suzuki or something like that. That is specific for the flute and for starting elementary age students. So typically you would start around third grade, maybe sixth grade in your band program. So this is kind of, I'm not trying to make prodigies, don't misunderstand,
Sure.
but a way to just use that medium earlier, or anybody, in any age really, but it is kind of geared towards younger children. So
Cool. Are there opportunities when you're giving tours? Does the things that you're doing in your day job, in the music that you're playing and the instrument that you're playing, specifically, do you find ways in which these two things sort of intersect and it helps the tour or information on the tour?
There has been one piece that I have brought in, like a musical example that I have brought into our tours, and Glenna, I think, added it to the script. So there is a Chinese figure, standing warrior figure, and he's kind of half clay and half with this really pretty green glaze. And we talk a lot about the Silk Road, especially with that piece. That's just kind of the cultural exchange and cultural ideas, and that just really stood out to me. There is a classical ensemble, or a world music, classical, Western mix ensemble called the Silk Road Ensemble, led by Yo-Yo Ma, maybe a familiar name, cellist. And there was some kind of sense of there was this piece that would connect, and it's called Swallow Song, and it's kind of these two lovers, one in China and one in Kazakhstan, which is kind of, there's like the Chinese sculpture and the glaze probably came from Kazakhstan. So it was just kind of an interesting mix, and neat to just be able to have students hear Chinese language being sung, especially. It's a piece for solo male voice and cello. Yeah, so that's probably the biggest thing I've done, but I don't know, something silly was classroom management, so when I have little students, I'll have them sit on the floor by singing like, will you please sit down? Or will you please stand up? Silly things like that. So when I have really little kids, there's a couple, they get tired, they're on this tour. So there's a couple times where it's really great to have them sit on the floor while you're talking about some of the different pieces. And
Sure.
so, silly things like that.
Yeah. No, but that's
not super profound, but it actually is kind of nice.
Yeah, but those are things that make the tour memorable. Who knows? Like, that tune may be stuck in their head now. But I love to hear stories like that, because when you think about docents in a museum, there's almost a stereotype that the docent really is the security guard with an art history degree. And yet they're volunteers. You're volunteers. You volunteer your time. And I want to talk about that, because time isn't something we don't get back.
Sure.
And you clearly love what you're doing. Otherwise, what would be the point, right? And so it becomes an infectious sort of thing. So the folks who are there on the tour, they're not just getting the history of the pieces, but they're hearing it from somebody who is trying to be as interactive as we can in that space, and to provide people with a memorable experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for anyone, what do you get out of the volunteer part? And so it's a two-parter. What do you get out of it? And what could you tell other people who might be interested or maybe on the fence about volunteering, why they should?
Gosh, what do I get out of it? I mean, I'm learning so much. I love, how many exhibits we have. It's not like we just went through that crash course with Glenna and then that's all you do the rest of the time. Honestly, we're being trained multiple times a year, each tour, what students ask, and people jumping in with what they're seeing, or asking questions or responding to your questions. It is really a lot of give and take. I don't always feel like I'm really giving as much as I'm receiving. And also just being part of the museum, being part of the docent corps, it is just really neat to meet so many people. I think, again, being a classical musician, I'm used to collaborating and I seek those experiences out. So being in a place, I think of Columbia Museum of Art as a cultural hub for our city, so just a lot is always happening here. And so it's just so exciting to be a part of that and share that with other people who are interested in seeking it out as well.
Emily Creedle is a docent here at the Columbia Museum of Art. If you're interested in lending a hand here at the museum, you can learn more about volunteering at www.columbiamuseum.org/belong. Coming up,
it doesn't have to be anything big or extravagant, but you do have the possibility of being a poet.
Jennifer Bartell Boykin after this.
Leaves like prayer. This is what leaves like a prayer. The collard greens my father planted. A collard is a cabbage that does not develop a heart. Their green leaves are like hands about to clasp in solemn devotion, arching towards the sun for a blessing. My father sleeps in his grave, and the collard greens he planted keep growing in his autumn garden. The frost sweetens them, and the time comes to reap what dead hands have sown. My brother cuts the green hands from the earth's body. The green prayers do not leave the black earth. But here we are at the table with turkey and stuffing, clasping our hands over his greens drenched in ham hock juice. We eat prayers. This we do in remembrance of him. Take, eat his love grown for you and me. I am Jennifer Bartell Boykin. I am the Poet Laureate of the City of Columbia, and I am the author of Traveling Mercy, which will be released in November.
So we're here today with my good friend, Jennifer Bartell Boykin, who is a recently appointed Poet Laureate of the City of Columbia and teaches English at Spring Valley High School.
Yes.
Oh, that's a lot, right?
just those things are a lot. Yeah.
But of course, of all the things that you do, you probably really only get paid for one of those things. Everything else it seems like it's a labor of love.
That is true.
Could you talk to us a little bit about being Poet Laureate of Columbia, what that means? Maybe there's some exciting things you've got going on or thinking about doing. What's the day-to-day like?
I was named Poet Laureate in December, and so my term started in January, and it's been very busy. I was kind of thinking at some point it would slow down, but we really haven't gotten to that point yet. People have been calling me, emailing, asking me to write poems for different events, and I've been asked to speak at different places. So it's just really exciting. I've been told that I will have to tell some people no, like I can't say yes to everything. I really want to say yes to everything, but there's some really exciting things that I've participated in. Everybody's just been really nice too. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I think, it's such a needed position. I think we're both in what we do can see the value of poetry. And I can't imagine my life without it.
Right.
I can't imagine not being a poet. But so much of what we do are trying to help others to see the things that we see and how much value poetry has to their everyday lives. Is that something that you find yourself doing as Poet Laureate as well, of just trying to get the average everyday person to realize that?
Yeah. So one thing I really want to do during my term as Poet Laureate is get those closet poets out and be like, there are people who wrote poems. They probably have poems under their bed or, poems stuck in these folders somewhere in their house, and they just have them sitting there and they thought that it wasn't good or they just forgot about it. But I feel like everyone has these lines of poetry inside of them. And it's like everybody has the capacity to be a poet, just coming to the page and getting those words inside of you, because everyone has those words. We have stories, we have ideas and thoughts that we can get down and turn into a poem. We just need the occasion and we need somebody, which is me, to be like, hey, you want to write a poem? This is how you can write a poem. This is how you can get started. And also, I think, and I've said this before, where you have the perception of what a poet is and what a poem is supposed to be. And a lot of it is very academic.
Yes.
From like school, like, I have to have iambic pentameter and it has to be a sonnet. Poetry has been perceived as this thing that other people do. But in reality, it's a lot more freer than how it's presented to us in school. So getting people reading contemporary poets, people who are living and breathing right now and writing poems, just allowing them to see that there are other possibilities than what they maybe grew up with in school.
Absolutely, Jen. It's exactly what we, I think, need to be doing, is reminding folks that you can do this. You have something inside you that can come out.
Correct. Yeah.
But you work with kids, seniors, really kind of the full gamut, right?
Yeah, I will say probably, well, I can't even say I haven't worked with elementary school kids because I did the read-in with the state library, and those were the littles, so kids in daycare and preschool. But I gave a speech and just thinking about like, okay, if I were a kid sitting in the crowd, 3, 4, 5 years old, what would I want someone to say? And just thinking about, I didn't have a person who looked like me, a Black poet, a woman poet, a poet from the South. I didn't have that role model to be like, oh yeah, this person is that thing. Maybe I can do it too. So just thinking about like, what would I want to tell myself if I were sitting in that crowd? And it was really fun because from that, there was someone who came up to me and was like, hey, I'm from Johnsonville. Do you know da 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 da? And so it was like, hey, there were kids from like where I'm from in that crowd. So just, trying to make that connection. Relationships, in teaching, we always talk about how important relationships are and building relationships with people. And I think that in those types of settings where it's a workshop or there's a speech or giving a lecture or something like that, just trying to make that one-on-one connection with people and help them to see like, hey, I was like you once upon a time. I was someone who was just in the world and had feelings and thoughts, but didn't really know what to do with them. Right. And then I had that moment where I wrote a poem and I was like, yeah, this is it. This is how I want to express myself.
Was this something that you knew since you were little?
So I always began my story with my grandmother because she told stories my entire life. My grandmother was born in 1911, and then I was born in 1983. When I came into the world, she had already been an older person. Like one of my cousins always say, she's been old my whole life. Right. Which, at that point she was. But she would always tell me stories. She would tell me stories about her life, how things were for her growing up. And then sometimes she would tell me the same story over and over and over. And at some point I realized grandma's telling me this because she wants me to remember. And writing is the way I chose to remember. And so I would just write down things she would say to me, if there's like a little nugget of wisdom or something like that. And then one day, I was 13 years old when I wrote my first poem. So one day I was outside in my childhood neighborhood and I was jumping a ditch because jumping ditches is just something you do for fun. It's just, that's right. Hey, let's see if I can clear this ditch. And I jumped the ditch and I heard a bird singing. And then I just kind of heard a voice that said, and I can't remember the exact line, but the voice was kind of like, just as the bird sings freely, I'll be free again, or something like that. And so I went into the house and I wrote it down. And when I wrote it down, it came out as a poem. It wasn't in paragraph form. It was a poem. It was broken into lines. And I've been writing ever since that day. I've been writing poetry since that day.
I love the image though of young Jennifer jumping the ditch, and the action of that being what becomes the catalyst of the first poem, which that is probably the most free we are growing up when we're kids, right? Yeah. I mean, our constraints are bedtime and school. I mean, other than that, we and especially growing up in rural areas and back then, you did have freedom to be able to kind of wander and play and explore. Yeah. And then as we become adults, the more of that gets taken away from us, right? I mean, jobs, kids, everything can kind of take that away a little bit.
Yeah. It's just like as an adult, it feels like the busyness of life gets in the way of me wanting to just create. Like when I was a kid, I could just go off and write and read, and I didn't have to worry about bills or getting to work on time or, whatever. I could just go and create. And now some of those poems are pretty terrible.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. They're good. They're good for refrigerators. That's about it.
Yeah. It's just like, ooh.
But it's the act of it, right? It's the act of writing. So like so let's go back to these, the workshops and the things that you're doing now. I mean, you're wanting them to write, but at no point are you guaranteeing them you're going to write a really great poem.
Right. Okay. Yes. And that's, I teach creative writing at Spring Valley. And one thing I always tell my students is I will give you the writing prompts. I will give you writing feedback. We will look at poems and stories and different things. And we'll talk about what the writer is doing in those things. But at the end of the day, you are the one who is responsible for improving your writing. The amount of effort you put into it is on you. So I can't make you a better writer. You make yourself a better writer. Right. I'll just give you tools that you can use to help you in that process. But you are the one who has to put in the work and the energy to transform yourself into a better writer, if that's what you want to do.
Do you have some events that you're working on now as poet laureate that you're kind of planning? You don't have to spill out all the beans, but, or are there sort of annual projects you want to try to bring into the fold?
Yeah. So one thing that I'm trying to work on now is having some poetry workshops with teenagers. And I'm hoping to start those in September-ish after the school year started and everybody's kind of used to it. And those will be on Saturday mornings. And ideally, what we'll do is we'll continue those workshops throughout the school year, probably like twice a month. But I really have a goal of having a poetry festival here in Columbia sometime next year. So working on some details and everything for that. Those are kind of some big picture things. In addition to, I'll likely be commissioned for more poems and do different things. Yeah.
That's so cool. I think what I want our listeners to understand, and as one who has volunteered a lot of time, organized a lot of things, a lot of events, that, it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy that you put into that. And, you never know what your results are going to be. It's very hard to predict, right? You could plan all of that and 2 people show up. You could plan all of that and 40 people show up. But yet there's something that keeps us wanting to keep doing it, right? Because, the easiest thing for you to do, Jennifer, is to say, you know what? Thanks for the title. I appreciate it, but I'm going to go back and write and, hang out with my son and just go teach my students and just, I ain't going to leave the husband out of the picture too. You can hang out with him too. But all these things that you could do, but you choose to continue to do this. Like it's a quest. Do you feel like you have to do this?
Wow, Ray, you're going kind of deep.
I told you I would. I'll go sneaky on you.
I believe that I've been called to help people. It's something that, I watched my parents do it. We didn't grow up rich by any stretch of the imagination, but I grew up watching my parents help people and, give people money they didn't really have and just pour into people in a way that they didn't really have to, you know? And the same thing with my grandmother. My grandmother raised several of her grandchildren after she raised something like 14 kids of her own. So I grew up in a family that was dedicated to helping other people. And when I became a teacher, I really was excited because it's like, yes, I get to share writing with other young people who were maybe like me when I was in school, kind of searching for something and not really sure what that something is. And I don't want to say it's a calling because that really feels, it feels cliche.
Not to me, it doesn't. I totally get it. No, I totally get it.
It's just like, the look on a person's face when they write a poem or when I tell them like, okay, well, you don't think you're a poet. You don't think you can write a poem. What if you did this? And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I can do that. Like, there's something about that moment that really brings me joy because I believe between writing and teaching, this is where I'm supposed to be and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so it really it makes me happy to see people unlock a part of themselves that they didn't know was there.
See, that wasn't so hard, right?
No, it wasn't.
Jennifer, I think, first of all, I hope you hear this many times throughout your terms as Poet Laureate of Columbia. Thank you. Because, the work that you are doing is extremely important. Sometimes you may not see it immediately, but you are making Columbia a better place. You're transforming lives one at a time, whether it's in your high school classroom at Spring Valley or at One Columbia office or at Richland Library or wherever. Hopefully you will be able to see that throughout your term of just watching people just blossom and grow from these experiences. But none of it would happen if you weren't willing to take that selfless step to help create and make those things happen. So thank you for that. Is there anything you would like to say to our listeners? I believe somebody has a book coming out pretty soon.
Oh, yeah. So yes, my first book of poetry, Travel and Mercy, will be coming out in November, and Finishing Line Press in Kentucky will be publishing. So, traveler mercy is a saying where I'm from that we give people when they are going on a trip or some type of journey. And so in the book, there are several journeys that I take through history, through grief, through my parents and, their marriage and eventual deaths. And so I wrote some of the poems while I was in the MFA program at USC. And part of this book was like my thesis in 2014. And so I did my thesis and then I started sending it out to places for publication. And for 8 years, I got rejections. For 8 years, I would go back and revise and try again, sending it out. It was a finalist at a couple places a few times. And there were times when I were very discouraged, but I just kept going and I kept doing it. One of the things that really helped me was I started blogging about my rejections. Because it was I got one, and for some reason it really hurt for some reason. I don't know. And at this point, I probably had like hundreds of rejections of this book. But I was like, I'm just gonna talk about how rejection is a part of the path to getting published. It's part of the writing process. Like when you're putting your work out there, it's gonna get rejected because everybody's not gonna like it. It's not gonna be for everybody, because a lot of times we put on social media our good moments when something is accepted or when this is about to come out. So I just kind of wanted to be transparent, not just with other people, but with myself as well, about the process of, okay, this rejection doesn't define me. It doesn't define my work. It doesn't mean that I'm not worthy as a poet. This is just a part of my process. And I'm just going to keep writing about it until I get my acceptance, not knowing that the acceptance was literally right around the corner.
Jennifer Bartell Boykin is the Poet Laureate of the City of Columbia. She teaches at Spring Valley High School, where she was named the 2019-2020 Teacher of the Year. Her debut book of poetry, Traveling Mercy, will be released in November of 2023 through Finishing Line Press. To volunteer, so much of it is a way of paying forward what I feel like others volunteered their time for me as a young poet, as a young professor, not real sure of what I was doing because I was coming into it so raw. It literally took other people volunteering their time to sit down and talk to me or let me talk to them, even. And man, I would take up a lot of their time. So I feel a sense of, that I owe that much to the community. And if there is an ulterior motive, it's because it makes me feel pretty damn good to do it. To know that you're called to do something, to be asked if you can do something, to say yes, to put your heart into it, to see the reaction of the audience around you, to see the people who are organizing it, how pleased they are, feels good. And makes you feel like you are a part of something bigger than yourself. You've been listening to Binder, a production of the Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about CMA exhibitions and programs, visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.